The Casey versus Planned Parenthood back in 1992 was the most serious challenge to the legality of the Roe v Wade decision in 1973. So in this video, I'm taking a look at how that Casey challenge affected the chart for the origin of Roe. In 1992, a key transit signifying challenge and change came from Jupiter moving through Virgo and in degrees putting it in square to the Saturn-Mars opposition. At the time of the announcement in June, Jupiter is at 9.5 degrees, but since it had already been in the 14.5 degree range as of the beginning of 1992, the planet will effectively operate at those degrees through the first 8+ months of the year. Therefore, the square is in full effect and signals changes and/or adjustments. Jupiter in the Roe chart is ruler of the ascendant as well as the 10th, which is where the midheaven and zenith are, and this makes it a super important planet. In 1992, Saturn was in the same sign as it is in present times, Aquarius, and in degrees that show it in trine to itself and sextile to Mars. I interpret this as the transit of a planet, Saturn, in a birth opposition to Mars, which points to the potential for limits and restrictions, and in a transiting trine, it will often deliver the tension of the opposition, which is seeking change, and this is exactly what happened. Another reason Saturn was extra strong around that time relates to its progressed position, because as it turns out, at birth, it was retrograde, but then was due to turn direct approximately 22 years or so later. Casey happens at the 19.5-year point in this measurement, but you can see from a glance at the ephemeris that Saturn was already in its station, a period that in progression spans from the plus 18-year point to around the 26-year point, which is the period with Saturn in that same degree area. So, bottom line, the law during that span of time in 1992 is liable to run into Saturn restrictions, and indeed it did. Notice, however, that the natal Pluto, which is trine to the Sun, in 1992 was transiting in sextile to Jupiter and to the Moon from the pure house of laws, the 9th, and this would suggest protection for the law, which is also what happened, so that even though it was reduced and restrained as per Saturn, was nevertheless left in place. If we now compare the Casey scenario to what I will call the Alito attack, describing the harshly medieval language this far-right judge used in making a case for destroying Roe v Wade altogether, we see that when the decision is due to happen, the key planet pressure is from transiting Pluto over Mercury. Other than that, Saturn is near a station and moving toward a trine to Uranus, Neptune is near the ascendant while sextiling the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction, and Uranus, though a bit past, is in the range of trining Venus, or you could read it as trining the Jupiter-Venus area of the chart. Meanwhile, Jupiter is moving toward a trine to the 10th house Neptune. It's hard to see how any of this is threatening. If anything, it is very supportive of the law, with the possible exception of Saturn, which was in trine back in 1992 and correlated to restrictions. So now here it is in trine again, same sign again also, it might perhaps signify the same thing again. As for Pluto over Mercury, it would seem more logical that it would attempt to transform the basis of the law than to destroy it, because Mercury rules the 4th house of the chart, which is the place of the base or the foundation of something. In summary, even though what we've heard from news reports seems to indicate that Roe v Wade is doomed, I continue to find astrological correspondences that seem to contradict that outcome. Still, I suppose I have to admit that the early May Supreme Court leak seems to point to 5 judges being willing to kill Roe altogether, and given the malignant fever afflicting all things Republican these days, and these 5 musketeers are certainly well-qualified Republican lackeys masquerading as serious judges, but if they bring Roe completely down on the Pluto over Mercury transit, then I would say that at the absolute worst, we would be looking at 2 to 3 years, which is the time needed for the transiting Pluto to reach the Sun in this Roe chart before the law is reformulated in a way that makes it stronger than it ever was.